On a remote island, surrounded by treacherous waters, stood an old lighthouse. For 30 years, Thomas had been its keeper, ensuring that ships found their way safely to shore. He lived there with his teenage son, Alex, grown up watching the lighthouse beam cut through the darkness every night. Different from his father. While Alex was filled with fear of storms. Most of all, the ocean that their island home. Children from nearby islands, they would swim, dive fearlessly. Always stayed on land, distance, wishing he could as them. One evening, a fierce storm approached. Thomas sat with the fireplace. "Son," he said, "tomorrow I must sail to the main for supplies. Lighthouse inspector is coming next week, and we need." But what if a ship needs on? What if the storm gets? Thomas placed on his son's shoulder. "That's why you're here, Alex. You operate the lighthouse. You've watched me times." Alex shook his head. "I can't, Father. What if I make a mistake? I'm not strong enough." Thomas interrupted him. "Fear is not your enemy. It's your teacher, not whether you feel afraid. The question you do, despite the fear." The next morning, at Alex's protests, set sail in his small boat. Alex watched until it disappeared into the morning, alone for the first time in his life. Just quietly, Alex cleaned the lighthouse, checked the oil, prepared for nightfall. His father had taught him. But as darkness approached, so did his anxiety. As the sun set, Alex climbed the spiral to the lamp room. His hands shook as he blazed to life, steam across the dark water. For several hours, peaceful. Alex began to feel a little himself. Maybe do this after all. Then, through the darkness, thing that made his blood run cold. Distant lights. Heading straight for the hidden base of the island. Alex ran to the telescope. Through the lens, he could see it clearly. A merchant lost in the storm, sailing directly toward the rocks that had countless ships before. He had two choices: safe in the lighthouse and hope course, or do something dangerous. Alex's fears screamed where he was, but then he remembered his. The question is what you do. Here. With a surge of Alex grabbed the emergency flares and outside into the raging storm. Rain lashed his face, and the wind nearly knocked him over. But he pressed on. He climbed down the treacherous cliff path, slipping on wet rocks, his heart pounding with terror. But he kept going. When he reached the shoreline, he began lighting flares one by one, waving them high above his head, signaling desperately to the approaching ship. The ship was so close now, he could hear the crew shouting. They had seen him. But it wasn't enough. The ship was still heading for the rocks. Without thinking, Alex did something that terrified him more than anything else. He waded into the dark, churning water, holding a flare high, moving closer to the rocks to make himself more visible. The freezing water reached his chest. Waves crashed over his head. But he held the flare steady, becoming a human beacon in the darkness. Finally, the ship's captain saw him. The vessel turned sharply, missing the rocks by mere yards. Alex had saved them. When Thomas returned the next morning, he found Alex exhausted but alive, sitting by the lighthouse. The crew of the merchant ship was there too, having come ashore to thank the young man who had saved their lives. The captain said, "Your son is a hero, sir. We would have been lost without him." Thomas looked at Alex with pride and amazement. "What happened to the boy who was afraid of the water?" Alex looked up at his father, his eyes no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet confidence. "I'm still afraid, Father, but I learned something last night. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and acting anyway. The moment I decided to help those people, the fear became smaller, and I became stronger." From that day forward, Alex never saw himself the same way. He still felt fear. We all do, but he no longer let it control him. He became one of the finest lighthouse keepers the island had ever known. And years later, when young people visited and spoke of their own fears, Alex would tell them what his father had taught him and what the storm had shown him. Courage is not something you feel. Courage is something you do. The lighthouse still stands today, guiding ships to safety. And in its beam, sailors sometimes see a reminder that the greatest victory is not the absence of fear, but the decision to shine your light despite it. For in our darkest moments, when fear threatens to overwhelm us, we discover that we are braver than we ever imagined. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more motivational content. See you in the next video.